Marcus Washington adjusted his tie one last time before stepping out of his sleek black sedan. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as he gathered his briefcase and legal documents. At 35, he had built a reputation as one of the most brilliant civil rights attorneys in the state. His track record spoke volumes: 15 major cases won against police departments, resulting in millions in settlements and significant policy changes. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was heading to another hearing about police misconduct while being one of the few black lawyers in the city who had never been stopped or harassed by law enforcement. Marcus often joked with his colleagues that his expensive suits and luxury car provided him with an invisible shield that protected him from the experiences his clients faced daily. As he walked toward the courthouse, Marcus noticed a commotion near the parking lot. 3 patrol cars had surrounded a small convenience store, their red and blue lights flashing urgently. Officers were questioning several people, their voices carrying across the morning air. Marcus slowed his pace, his professional instincts kicking in. He had seen this scene countless times: the aggressive posturing, the intimidation tactics, the way officers seemed to assume guilt before investigating facts. Detective Sarah Chen emerged from the store, frustration evident on her face. She had been working this robbery case for 2 weeks, and every lead had gone cold. The convenience store had been hit 3 times in the past month, always by the same suspect, a tall black man wearing a dark hoodie. The security footage was grainy, but the pattern was clear. Today's tip had led them here, to question potential witnesses and gather more information. Marcus checked his watch. He had 20 minutes before his hearing, but something about the scene troubled him. He recognized the look in the officer's eyes, that familiar mix of impatience and assumption that he had seen destroy too many innocent lives. Against his better judgment, he decided to observe for a few moments, staying at a safe distance while keeping an eye on the situation. Officer Rodriguez was questioning a young man who clearly didn't match the suspect's description, but the interrogation continued anyway. The kid looked terrified, stammering responses while his hands shook. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. This was exactly the kind of fishing expedition that led to false confessions and wrongful arrests. Detective Chen approached the scene, her notebook ready. She had been a good cop for 12 years, rising through the ranks despite facing her own challenges as an Asian woman in a predominantly white male department. She believed in justice and proper procedure, but she also felt the pressure to solve cases quickly. The media attention on the convenience store robberies was intensifying, and her captain was breathing down her neck for results. Marcus made a mental note of the badge numbers he could see clearly. If this escalated, he wanted to be prepared to file complaints or offer assistance to anyone who might need legal help. He had built his career on being in the right place at the right time, ready to stand up against injustice wherever he found it. The convenience store owner, Mr. Patel, stood near the entrance looking anxious. He had called the police after recognizing someone who might have been loitering near his store the previous evening. The description he gave was vague: tall, dark clothing, possibly the same person from the security footage. But under pressure from the investigating officers, his certainty had grown, even though his actual memory remained fuzzy. Marcus noticed how the questioning was becoming more aggressive. The officers were using classic intimidation techniques, standing too close, speaking in raised voices, making accusations rather than asking questions. He had seen this playbook used hundreds of times, and it rarely led to actual justice. Instead, it often resulted in false confessions from frightened individuals who just wanted the harassment to end. Detective Chen reviewed her notes one more time. The robberies had all occurred between 9 p.m. and midnight, always targeting stores with minimal security presence. The suspect seemed to know exactly when to strike for maximum cash availability, with minimum risk. This suggested someone familiar with retail operations, possibly someone who had worked in similar establishments. As Marcus continued watching, he noticed a young mother trying to shield her children from the scene. The kids looked scared, and their mother kept glancing nervously at the officers. This was the community impact that never made it into police reports, the fear and distrust that aggressive tactics created in neighborhoods that needed protection the most. Officer Martinez joined the questioning, bringing the total number of officers on scene to 6. Marcus recognized the escalation pattern. What had started as a simple information-gathering exercise was becoming a show of force. The additional officers created an atmosphere of intimidation that made everyone in the area uncomfortable, including innocent bystanders who had no connection to any crime. The radio chatter increased as more units reported their positions. Marcus could hear fragments of conversations about setting up a perimeter and checking identification of everyone in the area. This was moving beyond standard procedure into what looked like a fishing expedition that would waste resources and potentially violate people's rights. Detective Chen felt the weight of expectation from her superiors. The convenience store robberies had become a political issue, with city council members demanding action and local media running stories about rising crime rates. She knew that good police work took time and patience, but she also understood the pressure to show progress quickly. Marcus glanced at his watch again. His hearing would start in 10 minutes, but he couldn't bring himself to leave while this situation was developing. He had learned early in his career that the most important cases often found him when he wasn't actively looking for them. His instincts told him that this scene had the potential to become something much bigger than a routine investigation. The morning sun grew stronger, casting sharper shadows between the buildings. Marcus positioned himself where he could maintain visual contact with the scene, while staying out of the immediate area. He activated the voice recording app on his phone, a habit he had developed after years of documenting police encounters that his clients described to him later. As he prepared to document whatever was about to unfold, Marcus had no idea that within the next few hours, he would transition from observer to participant in a way that would fundamentally change not only his own life, but potentially the entire structure of law enforcement in his city. The morning had started like any other, with routine legal work and familiar patterns, but it was about to become the catalyst for the most important case of his career. Marcus was about to head to his hearing when he heard Detective Chen's radio crackle with new information. A witness claimed to have seen the robbery suspect walking toward the courthouse area just 15 minutes ago. The description was still vague, but it matched the basic profile they had been working with. Tall black man, dark clothing, moving with purpose through the downtown area. Officer Rodriguez immediately began scanning the vicinity, his eyes methodically checking every person who fit even the broadest interpretation of the suspect description. The pressure to make an arrest was mounting, and everyone on the scene felt it. 3 unsolved robberies had created a media storm, and the department needed results. Marcus gathered his briefcase and began walking toward the courthouse steps, completely unaware that he had become the focus of multiple sets of police eyes. His height, his race, and his dark suit created a superficial match with the suspect profile that the officers had been carrying in their minds for weeks. Detective Chen coordinated the response over her radio. The courthouse area was always busy during morning hours, with lawyers, defendants, witnesses, and court staff moving in all directions. Finding one specific person in that crowd would be challenging, but they had to try. She assigned officers to different positions around the building's perimeter. As Marcus climbed the courthouse steps, Officer Martinez noticed him from across the street. The height seemed right. The general appearance matched what they were looking for, and the confident stride could be interpreted as someone trying to blend in while escaping the scene of a crime. Martinez spoke into his radio, alerting other units to his location. The courthouse security guard, Mike Thompson, had worked the building for 8 years. He knew most of the regular attorneys by sight, and Marcus was definitely one of them. Thompson had seen him win several high-profile cases and had deep respect for his legal skills. But Thompson was inside the building and had no idea what was developing on the street outside. Marcus pulled out his phone to check messages from his law office. His secretary had confirmed that all documentation for today's hearing was ready, and his client would be arriving within the hour. This was the important case involving a wrongful termination claim against a major corporation, and Marcus felt confident about their chances of success. Detective Chen received the radio update about a possible suspect near the courthouse. She instructed her team to approach carefully and verify the identification before taking any action. She emphasized the need for proper procedure, especially in such a public location with so many potential witnesses around. Officer Rodriguez began moving toward Marcus's position, but he was still 2 blocks away. The morning foot traffic made it difficult to maintain visual contact, and he worried about losing sight of someone who might be their breakthrough in this frustrating case. Marcus entered the courthouse lobby and nodded to Mike Thompson at the security desk. Their usual friendly exchange was brief. Marcus was focused on reviewing his notes one final time before the hearing began. He had no reason to think that anyone outside the building was paying any attention to his movements. The radio chatter intensified as officers tried to coordinate their positions without creating obvious surveillance patterns. Detective Chen wanted to avoid any situation that might spook a potential suspect into running or, worse, taking drastic action in a crowded area. Officer Martinez reached the courthouse steps and spoke with another officer who had been stationed near the building entrance. The description they had was still quite general, but several people in the area could potentially match it. They needed to narrow down their focus quickly and professionally. Marcus took the elevator to the third floor, where his hearing was scheduled in Judge Harrison's courtroom. He had appeared before Harrison many times and knew the judge appreciated thorough preparation and clear arguments. Today's case involved complex employment law issues that Marcus felt passionate about defending. Meanwhile, Detective Chen was reviewing the witness statement that had led them to the courthouse area. The description was becoming more specific under questioning. The witness now mentioned seeing someone in professional clothing, possibly carrying a briefcase, walking with confidence toward the government district. Officer Rodriguez finally reached the courthouse area and began checking with building security about anyone who had entered recently matching their suspect profile. The conversation with security would prove to be a critical moment, though none of the participants realized it yet. Mike Thompson confirmed that several people matching the general description had entered the building that morning, as was typical for any weekday. The courthouse was a busy place and many attorneys, defendants, and court staff moved through the building regularly. Thompson offered to check the visitor log and security camera footage if needed. Marcus was reviewing his opening statement when his phone buzzed with a text from his client, confirming arrival at the courthouse in 10 minutes. Everything was proceeding normally from his perspective, though he did notice more police activity outside than usual when he had glanced through the courtroom windows. Detective Chen made the decision to have officers check with courthouse personnel about recent arrivals. This was standard procedure when tracking a suspect who might have entered a public building. She wanted to be thorough but also mindful of not disrupting normal court operations. The security footage review began in the courthouse basement, where Mike Thompson showed Officer Rodriguez the morning's entry recordings. The cameras captured everyone who had passed through the main entrance, including Marcus arriving 20 minutes earlier with his briefcase and professional attire. Officer Rodriguez studied the footage carefully, comparing what he saw with the witness descriptions and suspect profile they had been working with. The timing seemed to match the witness report, and the general appearance was consistent with their information. Marcus checked his watch and saw that his hearing would begin in 5 minutes. He organized his papers one final time and prepared to present his case to Judge Harrison. The morning had been routine so far, and he expected it to continue that way through a successful legal proceeding. Detective Chen received a radio update indicating that courthouse security was cooperating with their investigation and had identified several individuals who had entered the building around the relevant time frame. She requested more specific information about each person to help narrow their focus. The identification process was about to begin, though Marcus remained completely unaware that he had become the subject of police attention. He was thinking about legal precedents and courtroom strategy, not about robbery investigations or suspect descriptions that might superficially match his appearance. Officer Martinez positioned himself near the courthouse entrance while other officers prepared to coordinate with building security. The investigation was moving from the street into the courthouse itself, setting up the collision between Marcus's normal professional routine and a criminal investigation that was about to change everything. Officer Rodriguez made the identification from the security footage. The timing matched perfectly with the witness report, and the physical description was close enough to warrant further investigation. He radioed Detective Chen with his findings, describing a tall black man in professional clothing who had entered the courthouse. 20 minutes after the reported sighting near the convenience store, Marcus was standing outside Judge Harrison's courtroom when he noticed unusual activity in the courthouse lobby below. Through the glass walls, He could see several police officers talking intensely with security personnel. His legal instincts kicked in, wondering if there was some kind of security threat that might delay court proceedings. Detective Chen reviewed the information and made the decision to approach the individual for questioning. She emphasized to her team that this was still an identification process, not an arrest. They needed to verify identity and determine if this person had any connection to their robbery investigation. Mike Thompson led Officer Rodriguez and Detective Chen toward the elevator, explaining that the individual they were looking for had gone to the 3rd floor about 15 minutes earlier. Thompson felt uncomfortable about the situation, but understood his obligation to cooperate with police investigations. As Marcus prepared to enter the courtroom, he saw his client, Mrs. Rodriguez, approaching from the elevator area. She looked nervous about the hearing, which was understandable given the importance of the case to her family's financial future. Marcus offered her a reassuring smile and began to explain what they could expect during the proceedings. The elevator opened on the 3rd floor, and Detective Chen stepped out first, followed by Officer Rodriguez and 2 additional officers who had joined them. The courthouse hallway was busy with typical morning activity, attorneys meeting with clients, court staff moving between offices, and people waiting for various proceedings to begin. Marcus was in the middle of explaining courtroom procedures to Mrs. Rodriguez when he noticed the group of police officers walking purposefully down the hallway. Their body language suggested they were looking for someone specific, and Marcus felt a familiar professional concern about what might be developing. Detective Chen spotted Marcus immediately. His height and general appearance matched the description they had been given, and his location in the courthouse fit with the witness timeline. She approached slowly, wanting to handle the situation professionally and avoid creating unnecessary drama in such a public setting. Officer Rodriguez flanked Detective Chen's approach, positioning himself to prevent any potential escape route. This was standard procedure when approaching someone for questioning, though it often appeared intimidating to bystanders who didn't understand police tactics. Marcus noticed the officers approaching and instinctively stepped slightly in front of Mrs. Rodriguez, a protective gesture born from years of dealing with law enforcement situations that often went wrong quickly. He maintained eye contact with Detective Chen, trying to assess the situation and determine what was happening. Detective Chen reached Marcus and politely asked if she could speak with him privately. She showed her badge and explained that they were investigating a robbery and needed to ask him some questions. Her tone was professional, but Marcus immediately recognized the familiar pattern of police encounters he had witnessed countless times with his clients. Mrs. Rodriguez looked frightened and confused. She had never been involved in any police interaction before, and seeing her attorney suddenly become the focus of law enforcement attention was terrifying. She stepped back, unsure whether she should stay or leave the area. Marcus asked Detective Chen what specific information she needed and whether he was being detained or was free to leave. His legal training kicked in automatically, and he began mentally cataloging everything about the encounter: the officers' positions, their exact words, the public nature of the interaction. Detective Chen explained that they were investigating a series of convenience store robberies and had received information about a suspect in the courthouse area. She asked Marcus to provide identification and account for his movements that morning. Her request was phrased politely, but the presence of multiple officers made it clear this wasn't really optional. Officer Rodriguez watched the interaction carefully, looking for any signs of evasion or suspicious behavior. Marcus's calm, professional demeanor and legal knowledge were not what he had expected from someone who might be involved in convenience store robberies. Marcus provided his driver's license and state bar identification card, explaining that he was an attorney preparing for a hearing scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. He offered to provide contact information for his law office and references to verify his identity and professional status. Detective Chen examined the identification documents carefully. Marcus Washington, licensed attorney, address in an upscale neighborhood, no obvious red flags in the basic information. But she had seen skilled criminals with legitimate cover identities before, and she wasn't ready to dismiss the investigation based solely on professional credentials. The courthouse hallway began to attract attention as other attorneys and court staff noticed the police presence. Several people recognized Marcus and looked concerned about why he was being questioned. The interaction was becoming more public than Detective Chen had intended. Marcus remained calm but felt increasingly concerned about the direction of the encounter. He recognized the signs of a fishing expedition, vague allegations, requests for detailed explanations of routine activities, and the implicit assumption that he needed to prove his innocence rather than the police proving his guilt. Officer Martinez arrived as backup, bringing the total number of officers to 4. The additional presence made the situation feel more serious and attracted even more attention from courthouse personnel and visitors. Mrs. Rodriguez approached cautiously and asked Marcus if she should postpone their hearing. She was clearly distressed by the situation and worried about how this might affect her legal case. Marcus assured her that everything would be resolved quickly and that their hearing should proceed as scheduled. Detective Chen asked Marcus to explain his exact movements that morning, starting from when he left his home. She wanted a detailed timeline that could be verified against the witness reports and security footage from various locations. Marcus provided a clear, factual account of his morning routine, leaving his house, stopping for coffee, driving to the courthouse, observing the police activity at the convenience store, and entering the courthouse to prepare for his hearing. He mentioned that he had actually witnessed the investigation at the convenience store before coming inside. Officer Rodriguez found it interesting that Marcus admitted to being near the convenience store that morning. While this could be innocent, it also placed him in the general area where they were investigating. He made notes about this connection for follow-up questions. Detective Chen asked why Marcus had stopped to observe the police activity at the convenience store instead of proceeding directly to his hearing. She wanted to understand his motivation for lingering near an active investigation scene. Marcus explained that as a civil rights attorney, he regularly observed police interactions to ensure proper procedures were followed. He mentioned his professional background and track record of representing clients in police misconduct cases. The revelation that Marcus was a civil rights attorney specializing in police misconduct cases created an unexpected dynamic in the interaction. Detective Chen realized that this person would be extremely knowledgeable about proper procedures and would likely document everything about their encounter. Detective Chen felt the weight of the situation shift dramatically. She was questioning a prominent civil rights attorney who specialized in exactly the kind of police interactions they were having right now. Every word, every action, every procedure would be scrutinized with professional expertise that most people simply didn't possess. Officer Rodriguez sensed the tension and quietly radioed for Sergeant Williams to come to the scene. Supervisory presence would be important, given the high-profile nature of the person they were questioning. The last thing the department needed was a civil rights attorney claiming improper treatment during a routine investigation. Marcus continued to cooperate fully while mentally documenting every aspect of the encounter. He noted the officers' names from their badges, their exact positions, the timestamps, and the growing crowd of observers. His years of experience told him the situation could escalate quickly, if not handled properly. Mrs. Rodriguez watched nervously as more courthouse personnel stopped to observe the unfolding drama. Several attorneys she recognized were whispering among themselves, clearly concerned about seeing Marcus being questioned by police. The situation was becoming a public spectacle. Sergeant Williams arrived and immediately assessed the scene. He had 20 years of experience and knew that high-profile public encounters required extra care and attention to proper procedures. He quietly pulled Detective Chen aside for a brief update on the investigation's status. Marcus checked his watch and politely informed the officers that his scheduled court hearing was beginning in 2 minutes. He asked whether he was being detained or if he could proceed to fulfill his professional obligations to his client. Detective Chen consulted with Sergeant Williams about how to proceed. They had no concrete evidence linking Marcus to any crimes, but they also hadn't completed their investigation. The witness identification was still pending, and they needed to verify his alibi thoroughly. Officer Rodriguez suggested that they could escort Marcus to his hearing and continue the conversation afterward. This would allow them to maintain their investigation while not completely disrupting court proceedings. Marcus declined the escort offer, explaining that having police presence during his client's hearing would be prejudicial and inappropriate. He suggested that if they needed additional information, they could contact his law office to schedule a voluntary interview. Sergeant Williams recognized the delicate nature of the situation. Forcing a prominent attorney to miss his court hearing without sufficient cause could create significant problems for the department. He instructed his officers to step back and reconsider their approach. The courthouse elevator opened, and Judge Harrison's clerk emerged looking for Marcus. She announced that the judge was ready to begin proceedings and asked if there would be any delays. The timing created additional pressure for a quick resolution. Detective Chen made the decision to continue the detention. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the witness identification process was still incomplete, and she felt they needed to eliminate Marcus as a suspect before allowing him to leave. Marcus informed Mrs. Rodriguez that she should request a brief continuance from Judge Harrison while this situation was resolved. He assured her that this was just a misunderstanding that would be cleared up quickly, though privately he was becoming more concerned. Officer Martinez positioned himself near the courtroom entrance, while other officers maintained their positions around Marcus. The detention was becoming more formal and restrictive, despite the lack of any charges or concrete evidence. Sergeant Williams reviewed the investigation details with Detective Chen. They had a vague witness description, security footage showing Marcus entering the courthouse, and his admission to being near the convenience store that morning. None of this constituted probable cause for arrest, but it justified continued questioning. Marcus requested to make a phone call to his law office to inform them of the situation. This was a reasonable request, but Detective Chen was concerned about him potentially coordinating alibis or alerting other attorneys who might interfere with their investigation. The crowd of observers continued to grow as word spread through the courthouse about the unusual police activity. Several prominent attorneys approached to offer assistance, recognizing Marcus and understanding that something unusual was happening. Judge Harrison sent his clerk to investigate the delay in his courtroom. The clerk returned with news that one of the scheduled attorneys was being questioned by police in connection with an unspecified investigation. Detective Chen allowed Marcus to make his phone call, but insisted on monitoring the conversation. Marcus called his office and spoke carefully, providing basic information about his location and the need for legal representation. Without going into details, Officer Rodriguez was becoming uncomfortable with the extended public detention of someone who appeared to be cooperative and credible. The witness identification hadn't been completed, and holding a professional attorney without stronger evidence was problematic. Marcus's law partner, James Chen, arrived at the courthouse within 15 minutes of receiving the call. He was an experienced criminal defense attorney who immediately recognized the irregularities in how the situation was being handled. Sergeant Williams found himself in an increasingly difficult position. The investigation had legitimate foundations, but the public nature of the detention and the high-profile target were creating complications that could have lasting consequences for the department. James Chen approached the group and identified himself as Marcus's attorney. He politely requested information about the specific allegations and the legal basis for continuing to detain his client without formal charges. Detective Chen explained the robbery investigation and the witness information that had led them to Marcus. She emphasized that this was still an identification process and not an arrest, though the distinction was becoming increasingly unclear. James Chen pointed out that his client had been cooperative throughout the encounter and had provided verifiable identification and alibi information. He requested that Marcus be allowed to fulfill his court obligations while they worked to resolve the investigation. The situation reached a critical moment when Mrs. Rodriguez emerged from the courtroom in tears. Judge Harrison had reluctantly granted a continuance, but she was devastated by the disruption to her case and frightened by the police activity surrounding her attorney. Marcus felt responsible for the impact on his client's case and asked the officers directly whether he was under arrest or free to leave. The question demanded a clear answer that would define the legal nature of their encounter. Sergeant Williams realized that they had reached a decision point. They could either arrest Marcus based on the limited evidence they had, or release him and continue their investigation through other means. The public setting and high-profile nature of the situation made this choice even more critical. Detective Chen looked around at the crowd of attorneys, court staff and other observers who were watching every move. She understood that whatever decision they made would be scrutinized and potentially challenged in ways that routine investigations never faced. The witness who had reported seeing someone near the convenience store was being brought to the courthouse for a potential identification. This could resolve the situation quickly, but it also meant prolonging the public detention while they waited for the witness to arrive. The witness arrived 15 minutes later, escorted by Officer Martinez. An elderly man named Robert Kim seemed nervous and overwhelmed by the formal courthouse setting. Detective Chen hoped that a positive identification would validate their investigation and justify the extended detention. Marcus stood calmly as Mr. Kim approached the group of officers. James Chen positioned himself next to his client, ready to object to any improper identification procedures. The crowd of courthouse observers had grown larger, creating an audience for what was becoming an increasingly problematic situation. Mr. Kim studied Marcus carefully for several long moments. The courthouse lighting was different from the street conditions where he claimed to have seen the robbery suspect. His confidence wavered as he looked at Marcus in his professional attire, surrounded by lawyers and court officials. Detective Chen asked Mr. Kim if this was the person he had seen near the convenience store that morning. She tried to keep her question neutral, but the pressure for a positive identification was evident in her voice and body language. After a long pause, Mr. Kim shook his head slowly. He explained that while Marcus was similar in height and general appearance, he wasn't certain this was the same person. The clothing was different, the setting was different, and his memory wasn't as clear as he had initially thought. Sergeant Williams felt a mixture of relief and frustration. The failed identification meant they couldn't justify continuing to detain Marcus, but it also meant they were back to having no solid leads in their robbery investigation. James Chen immediately requested that his client be released, pointing out that the witness identification had failed and that there was no longer any reasonable basis for detention. He had been documenting the entire encounter and was prepared to file complaints if the situation continued. Marcus remained professional but felt vindicated by the failed identification. He had known from the beginning that this was a case of mistaken identity, but the experience had given him first-hand insight into how quickly innocent people could become suspects in police investigations. Detective Chen reluctantly agreed to release Marcus, but requested that he remain available for further questioning if needed. She was disappointed by the outcome but recognized that they had followed proper procedures and couldn't justify continued detention. Officer Rodriguez began dispersing the crowd of observers, trying to restore some normalcy to the courthouse environment. The extended public spectacle had disrupted normal court operations and created exactly the kind of situation the department preferred to avoid. Marcus thanked the witness for his honesty and told him he understood how difficult eyewitness identification could be. His gracious response surprised several of the officers who had expected anger or threats of legal action. Mrs. Rodriguez approached Marcus tentatively, still shaken by the morning's events. She asked whether they could reschedule their hearing and whether this incident would affect her case in any way. Marcus assured Mrs. Rodriguez that her case would proceed normally and that the police investigation had no connection to her employment dispute. He scheduled a new hearing date and spent several minutes helping her understand that this had been a simple misunderstanding. As the immediate situation resolved, Marcus began thinking about the broader implications of what had just occurred. He had experienced firsthand the kind of encounter that his clients described regularly: the assumption of guilt, the public embarrassment, the disruption of daily life based on minimal evidence. James Chen suggested that they should consider filing a complaint about the extended public detention without sufficient cause. He argued that the police had violated several departmental policies and, potentially, Marcus's civil rights during the encounter. Marcus was more interested in understanding why the investigation had unfolded the way it did. He wanted to examine the systemic issues that had led to his detention rather than simply seeking individual accountability for the officers involved. Sergeant Williams approached Marcus before leaving and apologized for any inconvenience the investigation had caused. He explained that they were following up on legitimate witness reports and had tried to handle the situation professionally. Marcus accepted the apology, but suggested that the department needed better training on witness identification procedures and community interaction protocols. He offered to provide consultation on improving their practices to prevent similar incidents in the future. Detective Chen overheard the conversation and was struck by Marcus's constructive approach to the situation. Most people who had been publicly detained without cause would be angry and threatening lawsuits, but Marcus seemed genuinely interested in systemic improvement. The courthouse gradually returned to normal activity as police vehicles departed and the crowd of observers dispersed. However, word of the incident was already spreading through the legal community and would soon reach local media outlets. Marcus spent the rest of the morning thinking about his experience and how it connected to his professional work. He realized that he had gained invaluable perspective on police procedures that would make him a more effective advocate for his clients. James. Chen began researching recent cases involving wrongful detention and police identification procedures. He wanted to understand whether Marcus's experience represented broader patterns of problematic law enforcement practices in their city. By afternoon, Marcus had received calls from several journalists asking about the courthouse incident. The story was spreading quickly, and people were interested in his perspective as both a civil rights attorney and someone who had experienced questionable police treatment. Marcus decided to use the media attention constructively. Instead of simply criticizing the police department, he wanted to start a broader conversation about improving community police relations and reforming identification procedures. Detective Chen returned to the police station feeling frustrated by the failed investigation. She had followed proper procedures, but the outcome had created bad publicity for the department and hadn't advanced their robbery case at all. Sergeant Williams briefed his captain about the courthouse incident, emphasizing that all proper procedures had been followed, but acknowledging that the outcome was problematic. From a public relations perspective, Captain Morrison realized that the incident involving Marcus Washington could become a significant issue for the department. A prominent civil rights attorney who had been wrongfully detained would likely use the experience to advocate for policy changes. Marcus began drafting a detailed account of his experience, not for a lawsuit, but for a comprehensive analysis of how police identification procedures could be improved. He saw an opportunity to turn his personal experience into broader systemic change. The evening news featured a brief story about the courthouse incident, describing it as a case of mistaken identity that had temporarily disrupted court proceedings. The coverage was relatively neutral, but drew attention to ongoing issues with police-community relations. As Marcus reflected on the day's events, he realized that his brief detention had provided him with insights that years of legal practice hadn't given him. He now understood viscerally how quickly innocent people could find themselves caught up in criminal investigations, and how powerless they could feel even when they had done nothing wrong. 3 months after the courthouse incident, Marcus had transformed his experience into a comprehensive reform initiative that was gaining momentum throughout the city. His detailed analysis of police identification procedures had revealed systematic problems that extended far beyond his individual case. The report Marcus published documented dozens of similar incidents where innocent people had been detained based on vague witness descriptions and inadequate identification procedures. His legal expertise, combined with his personal experience, created a compelling argument for immediate reform. Detective Chen found herself in an unexpected position as a key supporter of Marcus's reform proposals. Her investigation experience had shown her how easily well-intentioned police work could go wrong without proper safeguards and community oversight. Captain Morrison initially resisted the reform proposals, viewing them as criticism of his department's professionalism. However, the growing media attention and community pressure made it clear that changes would be necessary to maintain public trust. Marcus organized a series of community meetings that brought together police officers, community members, and legal experts to discuss identification procedures and community policing strategies. These meetings became a model for constructive dialogue about police reform. The mayor appointed Marcus to chair a citizen oversight committee with authority to review police procedures and recommend policy changes. This was exactly the kind of systemic change Marcus had hoped to achieve through his legal career. Sergeant Williams became an advocate for reform within the police department, using his experience with the courthouse incident to help other officers understand how proper procedures could prevent similar problems in the future. The convenience store robberies that had started the original investigation were eventually solved through traditional detective work. The actual perpetrator bore no resemblance to Marcus, highlighting how unreliable eyewitness identification could be without proper verification procedures. Mrs. Rodriguez's employment case had been successfully resolved, and she became one of Marcus's strongest supporters in his reform efforts. Her experience witnessing his detention had shown her how quickly the justice system could fail ordinary people. James Chen joined Marcus's reform initiative as legal counsel, helping to draft new policies that would protect citizens' rights while allowing police to conduct legitimate investigations effectively. Mr. Kim, the witness whose failed identification had ultimately freed Marcus, became an advocate for better training on eyewitness testimony. His experience had taught him how memory could be unreliable under pressure. The police department implemented new identification procedures that required multiple forms of verification before detaining suspects. These changes reduced wrongful detentions by 60% within the first year. Marcus established a legal clinic that provided free representation to people who experienced police misconduct or wrongful detention. The clinic became a national model for community-based legal advocacy. Detective Chen was promoted to lieutenant and put in charge of training officers on the new identification procedures. Her experience with Marcus had convinced her that good policing required community trust and proper safeguards. The courthouse where Marcus had been detained now hosts quarterly community meetings where police and citizens discuss ongoing concerns and celebrate progress in building trust between law enforcement and the community. Marcus's reform initiative attracted national attention when other cities began implementing similar programs. His transformation from victim of mistaken identity to architect of systemic change inspired law enforcement professionals and community advocates across the country. The media coverage evolved from initial reports about a single incident to comprehensive analysis of how one person's experience could catalyze meaningful reform. Marcus became a sought-after speaker at law enforcement conferences and civil rights events. 2 years after his detention, Marcus was invited to address the police academy's graduating class. His speech focused on how proper procedures and community engagement could prevent the kind of incident he had experienced while still allowing effective law enforcement. Detective Chen, now Lieutenant Chen, often used Marcus's case as a teaching example in her training programs. She showed new officers how following proper procedures from the beginning could prevent situations that damaged both community trust and police effectiveness. The convenience store owner, Mr. Patel, became an active participant in the community policing initiatives that grew out of Marcus's reform efforts. His store became a regular meeting point for police officers and neighborhood residents to build relationships. Marcus's legal practice expanded as his reputation for constructive police reform grew. He represented clients across multiple states and helped draft legislation that improved police accountability while supporting effective law enforcement. The officer who had first spotted Marcus at the courthouse, Officer Rodriguez, eventually became a training instructor who taught proper identification procedures to new recruits. His experience had shown him how easily good intentions could lead to problematic outcomes without adequate safeguards. Sergeant Williams retired from active duty but continued working as a consultant for police departments implementing reform programs based on Marcus's model. His 20 years of experience helped bridge the gap between traditional policing and community-oriented approaches. Captain Morrison, who had initially resisted the reforms, eventually became one of their strongest supporters after seeing dramatic improvements in community relations and police effectiveness. Crime rates decreased as community trust increased. The witness identification procedures that Marcus helped design were adopted by police departments in 15 states within 3 years. The systematic approach reduced wrongful detentions while actually improving the accuracy of criminal investigations. Marcus established a scholarship program for students from underrepresented communities who wanted to pursue careers in law enforcement or civil rights law. The program emphasized the importance of building bridges between communities and institutions. The annual conference that grew out of Marcus's reform initiative became the largest gathering of police officers, community advocates, and legal professionals focused on constructive police reform. The conference attracted participants from around the world. 5 years after his courthouse detention, Marcus was appointed to serve on a federal task force examining police practices nationwide. His combination of legal expertise and personal experience made him an effective advocate for evidence-based reforms. The police department that had detained Marcus received national recognition for its innovative community policing programs and dramatic improvements in citizen satisfaction. The transformation demonstrated that reform could strengthen, rather than weaken, effective law enforcement. Marcus's story became required reading in law schools and police academies as an example of how individual experiences could drive systemic change when approached constructively rather than simply punitively. Detective Chen completed her master's degree in criminal justice and wrote her thesis on the Marcus Washington case, analyzing how proper procedures and community engagement could prevent similar incidents while improving police effectiveness. The courthouse elevator where Marcus had been questioned now features a plaque commemorating the reforms that grew out of that incident. The plaque serves as a reminder that justice requires both effective law enforcement and protection of individual rights. Marcus continued practicing law while serving as a national consultant on police reform. His approach emphasized that true reform required changing systems, not just punishing individuals, to create lasting improvements in police-community relations. The transformation that began with one case of mistaken identity had evolved into a national movement that improved policing practices while strengthening community safety. Marcus had turned his most challenging professional experience into his greatest contribution to justice and civil rights.